Hello, and welcome to the Introduction to the English Renaissance screencast. The Renaissance was late to take hold in England, in large part due to a long series of conflicts between the Plantagenet houses of York and Lancaster that were known as the Wars of the Roses. They were called the Wars of the Roses because each house took a rose as its sign. The House of York, a white rose, and the House of Lancaster, a red. These wars consumed the final 30 to 40 years of the medieval period and marked the end of the Plantagenet line in England. They had been fighting since the end of the reign of King Henry VI, and the wars were only ended in 1485 when Henry, Earl of Richmond, defeated Richard III, the Yorkist king, at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry, despite a distant relation to the Lancastrian line, was not truly a claimant of either house. He married a woman of the House of York to symbolically unite the warring houses, but immediately after the battle, rather than claiming the throne by right of blood, he claimed the throne by right of conquest and began what was seen then and is seen now as a brand new dynasty, the Tudor Dynasty. While the period of Tudor rule can hardly be called peaceful, it was a time of relative peace and sufficient calm for the cultural renaissance to finally reach England. While we think of Renaissance figures such as Leonardo da Vinci and Donatello and Michelangelo, who are associated primarily with visual arts or architecture as the primary figures of the Renaissance on the continent, England saw the Renaissance take form in a flowering of literature. It was the same humanist ideas, but the primary art produced as its legacy in England was literature. There was a fierce nationalism in the Tudor years, which saw Henry VIII make a political and religious break with Rome and institute the Anglican Church. By the end of the time, he united, at least legally, the kingdom under his grandnephew, James VI of Scotland, who was Elizabeth's nephew and godson. And when James became James I of England, this made Great Britain as a whole one nation for the first time. It saw this move by King Henry and his followers. It saw a diminishment of outside power and political or religious in English life, and a strengthening of the relative position of the unique aspects of the English culture and language as a result. Henry VIII broke with Rome not out of religious conviction, but out of what he saw as political necessity. He couldn't seem to get a son out of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. With the Pope waffling on Harry's divorce request, Catherine was a powerful member of the Spanish royal family. This is Catherine here, Henry's first wife. Of the Spanish family, which were powerful supporters of the Pope and Catholicism in general during the Reformation. Henry moved on his own, separated England from the Catholic Church, and placed himself as head of the newly created Church of England. The Anglican Church remained largely Catholic in doctrine in Henry's lifetime, although he did immediately embark on a massive confiscation of lands and monies that had belonged to various Catholic religious orders throughout the nation. He also worked to destroy the saints' shrines that had become pilgrimage sites, especially that of Thomas Becket in Canterbury. He also broke with precedent by allowing the dissemination of the Bible in English. Despite Henry's radical reorganization of church government and structure and his embrace of vernacular scripture, he changed little else, maintaining the Catholic liturgy nearly unaltered insisting on clerical celibacy, and even writing in 1539 that denial of the miracle of transubstantiation would be automatically punishable with burning. Henry moved England, at least politically, to the center of the political debates that surrounded the Reformation. He quickly proved uninterested in true religious reform, although he granted himself a divorce from Catherine, technically an annulment, I believe. He didn't grant the privilege generally to the Church of England, leaving the Church of England a relatively high church form of Protestantism that would move slowly toward a famously middle way between the Catholic liturgy and system of worship and the more radical Puritan sects of the Reformation, headed by reformers like John Calvin. This unsettled balancing act would prove the primary source of social disturbance throughout the Tudor dynasty. Harry famously married many different women. His second wife was Anne Boleyn, who was Elizabeth's mother. Mary, who was also one of his heirs, was his daughter with Catherine. He then married Jane Seymour, followed by Anne of Cleves, and finally two Catherines, first Catherine Howard and then Catherine Parr. Henry's son, Edward VI, took the throne young and ruled only 6 years, and he had been left by Henry to be raised by a powerful band of convinced Protestant lords, and they were more interested in real form than Henry had proven to be. Edward issued 2 versions of the Book of Common Prayer, central unifying theological and liturgical guide for the Anglican Church, pushed hard for conformity by all churches within the nation. Edward also saw the removal of images from churches, recognized and allowed marriages by the clergy, and made further confiscations of ecclesiastical lands. This push toward reform, however, was short-lived because Edward died. As we said, he was a very short reign, dies in 1553 and is followed on the throne by Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's daughter by Catherine of Aragon, who was a devout Catholic. Mary's short reign was one of considerable turmoil, particularly over the question of religion. Mary did her best to reverse all the changes made by her half-brother and father and to push England solidly back in Rome's corner. By this time, enough change had happened among the people, many of whom were far more radically Puritan than the royal and noble reformers, and thought, if anything, the Reformation hadn't advanced far enough, that she was met with strong resistance on all fronts. Her rule proved even shorter than her half-brothers, however, and any attempt to return England to Catholicism ended with her death in 1588. Mary was succeeded by her half-sister, Elizabeth, Henry's daughter by Anne Boleyn, and it is primarily her reign, the Elizabethan era, as an acceptable alternative for the high point of the English cultural renaissance, that is associated with the great flowering of the Tudor era. Elizabeth immediately signaled a return to the slightly reformed church of her half-brother's reign, symbolically embracing and kissing an English translation of the Bible in her coronation ceremony. She would seek a careful middle way throughout her reign, balancing a clear separation from Rome with a refusal to adopt the more radical reforms taking place in Calvin's Geneva or in Presbyterian Scotland.